Africa's first World Cup tournament has kicked off. The host, South Africa, said all would be ready, and it is. But at what cost and of what benefit? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. 20 years ago, South Africa was a deeply divided society. The policy of racial segregation or apartheid led directly to an international sports and trade boycott. South Africa was an international pariah. But on Friday, the world's most anticipated sporting event began in Johannesburg. All races cheered side by side in scenes reminiscent of South Africa's first all-inclusive elections in 1994. 32 nations had gathered in South Africa, ready to battle it out for the much sought-after Golden Trophy. But the lead-up to the event has been shrouded in some pessimism. From the moment FIFA awarded South Africa hosting honours for the 2010 World Cup, some skeptics believed the nation could not pull it off. Others maintained hosting the event would negatively impact on a country in which abject poverty is still widespread. But the event has kicked off, and everything from stadiums to transport infrastructure is ready. This is not luck, according to a former president, but sound economic planning.
We talked just now about the 2010 Soccer World Cup. And you would imagine the resources that the government has put into this to build the stadia and make sure the infrastructure is okay and all that. We would never have been able to undertake this commitment to FIFA if we hadn't taken these earlier steps to manage down that budget deficit. Because in the end, government had to find quite considerable resources to finance this infrastructure development for the World Cup, in addition to continuing to spend on other things. And as you will see, the country still, the debt levels are extremely good, very manageable, no crisis, but it's because of these earlier decisions.
Well, what are the benefits for South Africa in hosting the World Cup? Economists say the World Cup will add between 0.3 and 0.7 percentage points to South Africa's economic growth this year. Some 373,000 foreigners are expected to ingest $1.66 billion into the economy during the month-long tournament. Selected townships saw the introduction of breeze or brick block houses with electricity and clean running water. Soweto, adjacent to the stadium that will host the final, for example, is now thriving. And perhaps most importantly, the World Cup has given South Africans a tremendous sense of pride, achievement and unity, one that's permeated the continent as a whole. Well, joining me to discuss the topic, in Johannesburg, Ashwin Desai, political analyst and author of The Race to Transform Sport in Post-Apartheid South Africa. Also in Johannesburg, Ashraf Garda, a SABC journalist and sports analyst. And in London, Steve Wilson, sports writer for The Telegraph. Let's start off with Ashraf Garda. Is this tournament going to benefit the country?
Right now, I cannot hear you that clearly, but I'll suggest you wondering whether the tournament is worth it from a South African perspective. You know, I wondered long and hard about that question, and the truth is, you know, these major tournaments are less about the logic of whether they make rands and cents or dollars and cents to all of us, but whether they instill, as the piece said before, a sense of pride, a sense of unity, a sense of purpose for the country. And as we know, on an individual basis, you know, the most difficult thing to give to a human being is a sense of self-confidence. And I think for now, South Africa, besides some of the detractors, clearly has a sense of confidence. To go back to what Denny Jordan, the 2010 CEO, said a few days ago, he said, at the moment, it's now, even the doubters have become the believers. And I just like to think that South Africans will focus on that point, that the doubters have all turned around to become believers and therefore ambassadors for South Africa globally.
Ashwin Desai, are South Africans concentrating on that point?
No, of course not. I mean, the contradictions are just too stark to just concentrate on the fact that the doubters have become believers. In fact, the newspapers are replete with headlines about how FIFA has come to have a particular model that it's imposed on South Africa, and that, in fact, FIFA has gained incredibly from the tournament in the immediate, whereas South Africa's gains are much more ephemeral, they're much more down the line. So, incredible people are not doubting whether South Africa could have hosted the World Cup. There's something beautiful happening in this nation. There's a tremendous sense of excitement. But what we're starting to doubt is whether the model that FIFA has given us and that we have accepted will lead to a longer-term benefit for the country. No, I completely disagree with Ashraf Garda that the doubters have to become the believers. In fact, this is a time to doubt even more because we're hosting a fantastic World Cup. We're giving the world a fantastic World Cup. What are we going to get in return in real terms from the FIFA largesse?
Well, let's go to Steve Wilson in London for perhaps a more distanced view. From your vantage point there, do you think that this event is going to benefit South Africa in the long run?
Yes, I mean, looking from, like you say, a distance away, you hear with lots of sports events, not just the World Cup, with the Olympics and Asian Games and various things, they talk of legacy. Legacy is a real buzzword. And I think that's the important thing. The legacy from this World Cup isn't going to be in bricks and mortar or rands and pounds and dollars. It's going to be, in, like you said in your lead-in, about a sense of identity, a unity, a celebration of African culture, not just South African, but the whole of Africa. The organisers have been very keen to make it an Africa-wide sense. You look back to 2006, the German World Cup, which was hailed as a huge success. There was a real sense there that German nationalism, something that was sort of largely taboo for a long time, was able to be expressed in a very sort of benign and celebratory manner. There was flag waving, the people could get behind their team, and the effects of that cannot be underestimated. And that's going to be what the legacy from the South African World Cup is, not the bottom line or the money that FIFA does or doesn't make from this tournament.
Ashraf Garda, to respond to that point made a bit earlier, is this the time to be doubting that point being forcefully made?
Let me just say this, if what you're suggesting is on the issue of infrastructure, clearly they've come at a massive cost. We can't be naive on the one end, or the one end being supportive of the World Cup, to the fact that it's come at a massive cost, something like $6 billion US dollars, and whether South Africa would recoup all of that in 1 year, in 10 years, in 20 years, we don't really know. The reality is, many countries that have hosted major world tournaments clearly have then fallen short. Of course, Greece, the most recent example, hosting an Olympic Games, and a few years later the country is bankrupt. I think from a South African perspective, the politicians, the decision makers, the thought leaders would need to certainly put their heads together, and if they haven't done so already, then clearly they have serious problems. But they do need to put their heads together to ensure the longevity of the massive infrastructure investment they put in. But having said that, some of the infrastructure, the highways, the 4-lane highways, we've never had that luxury before. The airports, the fast rail system that has just come up now, the Gautrain, we've never had that. Spanking football stadiums owned by soccer as opposed to owned by rugby, we've never had that before. So I think a lot will change for the better. But again, having said that, a lot has to be put in place to ensure that we don't continue paying for the rest of our lives. But having said that also, you have to ask yourself, if we live in the present tense, in the now, at the moment South Africans would use the opportunity, would like to think that the opportunity to fuel South Africa as a nation beyond the 30 days of the 2010 World Cup will occur during the 2010 World Cup, meaning for 30 days without any doubt. And I've seen many other international channels around the world, including Al Jazeera, focused on South Africa and the positivity coming out of that. So fueling that positivity in terms of rebranding a country now well beyond the Mandela era to become a major player on the international stage, I don't think we can buy that 30-day window ever again.
Well, let's just stick with the economics of it at the moment. We discussed there 10 new stadiums, massive infrastructure developments, highways, airports being refurbished. In the end, though, and let's put this to Ashwin Desai, is the money spent going to be matched by the money earned from this event, looking at rands and cents?
No, clearly not. Already, even the most positive of economists are putting a spin that we're not going to be able to recoup that during the World Cup. And in the future, this is an intangible, this is a gamble. And that's all we want people to say, that we are gambling that the World Cup will bring other sporting events, more investment, more tourists to the country. Now, Ashraf is right to raise the Greece example. This is an incredible gamble in a particular global economic time when there's great competition to get comparative advantage. So there are difficulties there. But I think your earlier introduction by ex-President Thabo Mbeki hits the nail on the head. His argument is that how rational they were. Well, what you are saying actually is that they brought down the deficit, they saved money, but they saved money to have the World Cup and to build these huge citadels that will probably not be used again after the 30 days. And they denied ordinary South Africans basic infrastructure, basic lights and water, basic housing. This is a protest nation. We have a protest every month around basic things in life. Toilets. That's what we have protests around in this country. So we've denied South Africans the basic bare life in order to build these monuments. Now, my argument to people is, what will fill those stadiums again? The next time we can have a gigantic event in this country of this nature is the 2020 Olympics. We don't know where we'll get that. But the Olympics goes to a city, it doesn't go to a country. So that's the incredible gamble that this country has taken. And I'm arguing that what is it we can do with FIFA and what kind of political leverage we can have with FIFA so that we don't just get left as if, this has been a gigantic pyramid scheme where we've hosted the tournament, we've paid for it, but the profits go somewhere else. It just seems like a new form of colonialism to me.
Steve Wilson, let's pick up on that point. There has been criticism of FIFA, not only in this tournament, but in previous ones. Is it indeed, as expressed there, one-way traffic, that FIFA takes away all the profit and doesn't put in any investment?
That has been levelled at them in the past, that they really do like to have a very structured idea of how the tournament will be run. I mean, at the end of the day, it is their tournament, although it has been given to South Africa. South Africa wanted the right to host this. FIFA obviously has a vested interest. But you also have to remember that FIFA, and particularly Sepp Blatter, who's the president, was a huge supporter of African football, and it was kind of his desire to make sure that a World Cup, this huge celebration, arguably the biggest sporting event in the world, people say the Olympics, but for a truly global audience, the Football World Cup demands the greatest attention, and he really wanted it to be in Africa. And there is a sense that they have given something to Africa, and South Africa are providing something back. When you get down to the brass tacks of the money that's coming in and out, you need to speak to someone at FIFA to find out just exactly how that money is flowing. I'm sure they are creaming a certain amount off that, but there's a sense that there's the intangible sense of the joy and the excitement and the celebration of what's happening there at the moment. We've seen the scenes down there, even back here in London, and marvelled at them, the colour and the party that's going on there. You can't put an exact price on that, and it's hard to say to FIFA, well, look, you've taken X amount of money and we've earned you this amount of money. What South Africa has now and the opportunity to do is to build on this, whether it's with other competitions, whether it's with tourism, or whether it's just with a sense of identity and celebration of the country moving forward as it is now.
Ashraf Garda, we heard the accusation of FIFA operating as a new form of imperialism. What's your view of that specific point?
You're asking me about the role of FIFA. I mean, my view on FIFA is rather ambivalent. On the one hand, as a deliverer of football to people like myself and to the masses, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted that FIFA has brought the World Cup, allowed South Africa to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup. On the other hand, one has to concede that FIFA have ensured that South Africa as a government have had to give in more than any other country in terms of FIFA hosting the World Cup here. And you have to wonder why. I think South Africa, from the government part of view, clearly were almost gatecrashers to a party and felt they had to allow whatever is needed to happen for them to host the World Cup. And in that case, FIFA, certainly even amongst South Africans, comes across as this big brother, the all-controlling big brother. The reality, however, when we talk about FIFA, we can talk about international global franchises as well. So FIFA very much is that, a franchise that franchises out to different countries every 4 years. In this case, it's South Africa's term. You have to accept the fact that they will make the bunch of the profits. They've already made massive profits. We know that, mainly on the back of major television rights, and that's not a surprise at all. But on the other hand, we have to also concede that a lot of the monies that FIFA makes, besides what they keep for themselves, has been pumped into football. They fuel football for the next 4 years, and they certainly have done so extensively. I'm very aware of it throughout the African continent, where sadly, for a country that is football crazy, the majority of the governments of the African countries haven't committed themselves as much to the growth of football. South Africa, being a prime example of it, a country with so much wealth, relative wealth that is, and the football team now ranked 83 in the world, says a lot for the lack of development that South African football has committed to the footballers in the township. So in that sense, hopefully we'll see a difference.
Well, the tournament was always going to be about more than just the football, or indeed soccer as it's called in South Africa. It became in some eyes a central pillar of a political, economic and social process called the African Renaissance, in which the continent as a whole establishes a new and more respected place in the global order.
We indeed saw it as an important opportunity when Africa would join the rest of the world as an equal. And given the very widespread support for soccer, that this would be a message and that would be carried to billions of people across the globe. In a sense that Africa had arrived. And we thought it was very important, particularly in the context that we were talking about an African Renaissance and the certainty of the Africans claiming the 21st century.
Ashwin Desai, we hear there a statement that this is part of the African Renaissance, something that was very central to the policies and philosophy of former President Thabo Mbeki. Do you think that this is a valid view, that it is part of an African Renaissance, this tournament?
Well, let me take both Ashraf's comments and Mr. Wilson's and Thabo Mbeki's, because they're almost the same in a way. In fact, it's a very pessimistic view to look at soccer in that way when people are talking about celebration. The history of Africa in their relationship with FIFA has been a history of constant struggle to get some kind of equity, and there's been tremendous gains made. We had half a representation in 1966, and we fought to get the 5 or 6 teams that we get now. We fought FIFA to ensure that apartheid South Africa was excluded, and we achieved that. So the struggle against FIFA and to democratize FIFA, to make FIFA a very different organization it is now, should continue, and this is a platform to do it while it's on African soil. So I'm optimistic about that, and I think they're pessimistic that that's a fait accompli. Ex-President Thabo Mbeki's comments in the present context are almost laughable. Just in 2008, this country turned on Africans. We turned on them in the most violent way, and we have become a xenophobic nation. Sure, there's been a celebration now about Africa, but really the way even politicians responded to the xenophobia was a tragedy, that they were slow to move, and still people who were killed or removed have never seen any compensation for the kinds of effects it had on them. So this idea that somehow this South African World Cup is part of an African Renaissance, not true. It's actually become part of a South African chauvinism. South Africans, we always feel that we're not part of Africa, that we somehow an exceptionalism. And I think this is only reinforcing it. I can see how it might elevate South Africa in the world map, but it's not going to elevate Africa. In fact, during the Cricket World Cup, we played a few games in Zimbabwe and in Kenya. We shared the Cricket World Cup. This has become a South African World Cup for a South African elite, which has made incredible amounts of money during the World Cup. So, the idea that somehow we're going to enter the world as Africa as equals is incredibly optimistic.
Ashraf Garda, to pick up on a point there, we have the Ghanaians, we have the Ivory Coast, we have the Nigerians, we do have a large African presence within this tournament. Do you think that the xenophobia that we heard referred to there, that did manifest itself in South Africa a few years ago, that something like a shared sporting event like this can undermine it, act against it, prevent it from happening in future?
Okay, let me try and understand this question. My sense of the xenophobia issues, I mean, clearly that's abhorrent and I think is a real blight on the new South Africa, which held the moral high ground when the new South Africa was negotiated 16 odd years ago. But if you look back to the Confederations Cup in football terms last year, then the massive support for Egypt, I thought was amazing, and that tells you that certainly for this World Cup at least, South Africa will have 6 host nations, which is South Africa and the other 5 countries that you mentioned earlier, including the Nigerians and the Ghanaians and the Cameroons and the Algerians and so on. And I think that there's a sense, even I was at the game yesterday, seeing the Nigerians in action losing to Argentina. Certainly South Africans came behind the Nigerians in a huge way. So there is the sense that South Africa is for South Africa, on the one hand, and we have some problems with other countries, and we shouldn't have that. But on the other hand, South Africa, when Africa competes on the global stage, South Africa is fully behind Africa. But I would also, take the opportunity as well as saying this, that if we look at South Africa's own very racial problems in the country, they surface ever so often when politicians make noises that appear to divide people. And I believe, this particular World Cup has proven once again, in a matter of 2 days already, that sport can do what politicians unfortunately cannot do, is bring people together. We saw the opening game at Soccer City, the amazing mosaic, the South African rainbow once again coming to the fore. And I believe now, if you get a politician saying something and you get soccer talking, people will tend to follow football rather than follow the politicians. And they're voting with their feet, they're coming out in big numbers, and they're chanting along. And they're all different shades, and they're all behind South Africa, and of course behind the other theme, which is, Africa United.
Well, Steve Wilson, perhaps in this debate we are losing a sense of what has been, in the past days at least, a massive sense of celebration.
Yes, of course, and what would be particularly good for Africa, what would advance it in a sporting sense, certainly would be a success story on the pitch as much as off the pitch as well. That's why it was so important and so wonderful to see South Africa having such a great start themselves. There were some fears about them not quite being able to match the wonderful hosts that they are on the pitch. The sense in looking ahead to how the World Cup will advance Africa or Africans' cause in the future. It is only sport, it is sport, but we've seen in the past that sporting excellence or sporting achievement, like it was already mentioned, can do things that politicians really can't, because it speaks directly to the people. And if it can unite people within Africa, across the globe, who are looking in on this, then that's got to be a wonderfully positive thing, and can be a shortcut towards, it's not a cure-all for everything. A great World Cup in Africa and an African team doing very well isn't going to cure every problem. No one's, it's ridiculous to say that. But if it can keep the momentum going, if it can focus attention on African countries and on particularly South Africa, then it's all to the good.
Ashwin Desai, very briefly, is there a growing sense of unity in this tournament? Is this just a mirage, or is there a reality to it?
I think it's a moment, and it is a wonderful moment. You can get a sense of excitement on the streets and so on. But I really believe that once the reality of what the World Cup has meant, the emptiness that is going to give us in the years to come, I think the reactions are going to be quite negative. We've been through this before. In '95, the Mandela, the number 6 jersey, the Rugby World Cup, and there was a celebration, a national celebration. But look how quickly that disappeared. I think the challenge for us, just instead of celebrating with the moment, for people who have influence, is how do we build a momentum? How do we use the World Cup to really fundamentally change what is the most unequal country in the world? And if it's a focus on that, then the World Cup has been an incredible success. But if it becomes just a focus on the moment for politicians and so on, just to consolidate their positions, then one must ask some deep questions.
Well, the debate will continue, and thanks so much to our guests, Ashwin Desai and Ashraf Garda in Johannesburg, and Steve Wilson in London. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.